Okay, welcome to this A-level religious studies paper 2, ethics anthology 2 task on Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics. This is section 10. Let's read it. For moral pleasure is concerned with pleasures and pains. It is an account of the pleasure that we do bad things, an account of the pain that we abstain from noble ones. Hence we ought to have been brought up in a particular way from our very youth. As Plato says, so is both to delight in and to be pained by the things that we ought. This is right education. Now, let's start here. What does Aristotle think morality is all about? Now, he begins with this phrase here. For moral virtue is concerned with pleasures and pains. Now, notice the word concerned. It's not aimed at pleasure and pain. This is in contrast to utilitarian theory of the two sovereign masters of pleasure and pain. And although the calculus of Bentham is quite subtle and does take into account short-term and long-term pleasures, rather Aristotle is aiming at virtue, moral virtue. So in a sense, what is moral is what a virtuous person does. That's the way around that Aristotle thinks of it. So moral virtues deal in pleasure and pain, but they're not aimed at pleasure and pain. Pleasure and pain are related to. Now, how are they related? This is the next question we need to ask then. What does pleasure and pain do according to Aristotle? We read this next little section. The pleasure, we do bad things. So pleasure drives us to do crazy, immoral things. Sometimes. Fear of and then pain, just as much. Fear of pain keeps us from being noble. That's interesting. What does the word noble mean? What is Aristotle's idea of nobility? Well, you need to remember that Aristotle, like his teacher Plato, who gets a mention here, by the way, here's Plato down here, and for all their disagreement on this point, Plato and Aristotle are agreeing. That's an important synoptic link here. Plato and Aristotle agree. Both belong to the upper class. They were both gentlemen. It's very elitist. The virtuous individual and their conception of the virtuous individual is this elitist idea that is kind of bound up in their experience of the ideal Athenian gentleman. And the gentleman of gentlemen, for both Aristotle and Plato, is the philosopher, because par excellence, this is a key word, he is noble. Now, we have this word noble appearing here, noble. And it's a very unusual word. Actually, the word is properly, kaya, is properly translated beautiful. It's a beautiful thing to be a gentleman. It's a very Victorian idea of the gentleman. In Book 8, he talks of having the nobility, i.e. the beauty of being a gentleman. It's the pinnacle of society. It's the most thing you can aim at. So Aristotle's idea of nobility also is related to his theory of the soul. And like Plato, he had a tripartite theory of the soul. We'll do this when we look at life after death, and we need to understand the difference between their theories of life after death. Plato thought the soul was made of three parts, like a chariot, with the charioteer being the rational part of the soul, then the part of the soul that's aimed at the noble, and the part of the soul that's aimed at the physical, the pleasurable. And the rational part has to that's Plato. Aristotle has a different theory of the soul. He talks about the soul as the actuality of a body that has life. Remember his idea of potentiality and actuality? Well, it's the soul that gives it an actuality, animates it. It's the teleos of the body, as it were. And lots of things have soul, but humans are special because their bit of the soul, they have this thing called reason. So plants and animals and humans have a nutritive soul, aimed at survival, reproduction, and so on, gaining food. Animals have an extra bit, like humans, a sensitive soul. The highest thing an animal can do is aim at pleasure, at desires, animal desires we might talk about. But unlike animals and unlike plants, humans have a rational soul. That makes us noble. And unless we want to be like animals or just plants, we need to allow our noble side, our rational side, to thrive. So what for Aristotle is the typical way of becoming virtuous? And you could say it's go to a grammar school, as it were, or go to a selective school, and you will experience the experience of character building. Well, on account of the pain, we abstain from noble ones. So, in order to feel pleasure in the right things, we need to do the opposite. Not abstain from noble things in order to avoid pain, but to learn to embrace pain for the noble ones. Right, boys, get out back in the track, run another 6 laps. No whinging, no whining. It's good for you. It's good for you. You know, embrace the pain. No pain, no gain. Okay, that's the theory, a very individualistic theory of education and the right things. So we ought to be. We should accept that at times we will be pained to do the right thing. And if we are raised well from childhood, we embrace pain in order to do the right thing. So he says this, and it's again quite an elitist idea. We ought to have been brought up in a particular way from our very youth, from our childhood. I just want to bring in some AO2 type questions here. Buddhists and atheists, like David Hume, reject the idea of the soul. Hume, in his book, Inquire in Concerning Human Understanding, and Buddhists also rejected the Hindu idea of the soul. Today there are these others who have rediscovered, the emergent theorists of the soul, have rediscovered Aristotle's theory of the soul. So who has the better arguments? Now we'll do this more when we do life after death. So Hume says when he looks inside himself, he sees only a series of thoughts and sensations, not a collection. And in the Pali Canon, particularly in the Dhammapada, you read about anatta, no soul. And the Buddha describes what is rebirth. It's just like a candle passing on a flame. Later in the Questions of King Milinda, the monk Nagasena describes himself when asked, if I kill you, who do I kill? He says, well, the name Nagasena is just a practical designation, like a chariot. The parts of the chariot are not the chariot. The word chariot is a practical designation. There is no such thing as chariot. Or we could add to this J.C. Ryle's the book where he critiques the idea of Descartes and Descartes as a myth, and he says he gives the analogy of the university and the analogy of the cricket match. In the analogy of the cricket match, a guy stands up and with a foreigner, and then observes the cricket match. And when a bad thing is done, a body ball is bowled, and the cricketer says, the umpire, calls it, and the crowd jumps up and says, "That's not in the spirit of cricket." And the foreigner says, "Where is the spirit of cricket?" Or the university student who mistakenly looks at a building and says, "Is that the university?" when the university is more of a corporate thing, a practical designation. So who has the better arguments? Hume and the Pali Canon, or is it Plato and Aristotle? Plato's arguments, he has an argument of a child who was a math prodigy, who had innate knowledge, innate language, functional skills, and memories. There's another argument in Plato that is the problem of first-person pronoun language. Try and spend a day talking as if there is no I, so no me. I guarantee a millennial can't do it for 10 minutes. Aristotle thinking has his own argument. He talks about the soul is what supervenes upon the body, what animates it. And we could ask this, what is it that animates the body if it's not the soul? And today this is called the argument from intentionality or aboutness. And you find it in philosophers like J.P. Moreland and Peter S. Williams in their book recently published on dualism, a defense of substance dualism. What do you think? Is the soul a thing or not? So, the soul, key vocabulary perhaps for today. He says, Aristotle calls it the actuality of a body that has life, where life means a capacity for self-sustenance, growth, and reproduction. If one regards a living substance as a composite, that's a key, a composite of matter and form, then the soul is the form of the body. The soul is the form of a natural, or Aristotle sometimes calls it organic body. Section 10.